Hey, what's up YouTube? Jason here with Byte My Bits. Today's video is a complete build guide for one of the smallest, highest storage capacity Unraid / Plex Media servers powered by Ryzen and the famous P2000 graphics card. Now this little micro server should net you anywhere from 26 to 28 1080p transcoded streams at the same time, or 4 to 8 4K H.265 streams. The case I'm using today actually holds 8 drives normally, but in order to use the P2000 you do have to sacrifice one drive slot. Overall, if you were to use the largest capacity drives currently available on the market at the time of making this video at 16 terabytes each, you could have a storage capacity of up to 96 terabytes, or 84 terabytes if you were to populate it with 14 terabyte WD RAID drives. In this video, however, I will be using all Western Digital 4 terabyte hard drives, giving me a total use capacity of 24 terabytes. Let me give you the short list of the main components used in this build. Don't worry though, I will include a full list that will be in the description of this video that will be an Amazon link that goes directly to the full idea list. This idea list will give you everything needed to complete this build from start to finish. The total cost for this build is going to be roughly around $1,800. And this does include the cost for the Unraid Plus license. You don't need a Pro, that gives you 12 attached devices. However, it does not include the cost of any hard drives, only the SSDs. Just please keep in mind that prices on hardware does tend to fluctuate. So to give you the key points here, I am building everything in a Silverstone DS380B. This is a micro ITX/DTX case with 8 hot swappable bays. But in this configuration today, we can only use 7 of them. For the motherboard, I'm using a Gigabyte X570i Aurora Pro Mini ITX. I'm going to be using the Ryzen 3700X, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU, 32 gigabytes, a Corsair 3200 MHz RAM, a Corsair 450 watt 80 plus Platinum SFX power supply, the Noctua NH.L9 low profile CPU cooler, and this nifty little M.2 to 5-port SATA adapter, which I didn't even know was a thing, but literally is the one thing that makes this entire build possible because of the limitation of SATA ports on the motherboards. So basically it's the key to everything, super unique, and I totally recommend it. And of course, all the major heavy lifting in this build is going to be handled by the P2000 graphics card. Let's get started. This is the Gigabyte Mini ITX motherboard that proves size doesn't matter. It's what you do with it that really counts. The first thing we're going to want to do is take off the front M.2 heatsink/fan combo by undoing these 2 screws. Then we have to remove the 4 screws holding in the stock fan mount so we can use our Noctua low profile cooler. Just keep in mind that removing these screws will detach a metal backplate, so don't worry, this is expected. Speaking of, look how tiny this little cooler is. But it's not going to work as it is though. To use it with Ryzen, we need this little mounting kit that will be included in the Amazon link I provided. The mounting kit includes these 2 brackets, new screws, and a metal backplate. To change these over, remove the 4 screws that are holding in the 2 current metal brackets. Make sure to save these screws and use them to secure the replacement brackets. They only fit one way, so this part should be pretty easy. Now we get to stick our juicy 3700X into the socket. So raise the latch and make sure to line up the arrow on the bottom of the CPU with the arrow on the motherboard. Keep in mind that you can use many different Ryzen CPUs with this motherboard. Some will save you money, but if you go higher than the 3700X, you may run into some issues with cooling, but more on that later. Mounting the cooler will be a little different than normal. I made the fan wire face towards the PCI slot because it plugs in near the CPU power port, but just make sure that you have an idea of how the holes line up and how you want it to sit. Now it's time to add thermal paste to the CPU. This came with the Noctua CPU cooler. And I submit my thermal paste application method and quantity to the court of public opinion for judgment. So, have fun, internet. Moving on, after reassuring your alignment is correct, place the cooler upside down, flip the motherboard over, and carefully lower it down onto the heatsink. Try to make it a straight shot down and do not move it around too much after placement. I mean, some people might like things sloppy, but today is not a day for a mess. Once your motherboard is resting on the cooler, take the included metal backplate that came with your Noctua kit and place it on the board, lining it up with the holes, black side facing up. Now use the included mounting screws to secure it to your cooler. If you pick up your motherboard after these steps and the cooler falls off, I'm not really sure what you did to mess things up, but you need to try again. Once flipped over, look for the 4-pin fan port near your CPU power port and plug in the fan. It will be labeled on your motherboard as CPU_fan. Now it's time to install this magical little part that I didn't even know existed, the 5 SATA port to M.2 adapter. But before we do that, we have to remove the tiny little screw that holds it all down. Now this thing is easy to lose, so be careful, don't lose it. After that's removed, slide the M.2 adapter into the M.2 slot and replace the screw you just took out. It should hold the adapter down like it would a normal M.2 SSD. Now we install the RAM. And I went with 32 gigabytes with 3200 MHz DDR4 RAM because, well, it was on the supported list for the motherboard, and more RAM is better than not enough RAM. Also, 3200 MHz in my opinion is a great price to performance sweet spot for Ryzen. You could save a little bit of money with going less or slower RAM, but I really don't recommend it. Now, if you got a regular M.2 SSD, flip over the motherboard and install it in the available slot. Side note here though, I choose the Crucial SSD because, well, it was on sale. But even with good airflow, this thing runs hot. You can try a low profile heatsink if you want to, but you might have some fitment issues being that it's on the back of the motherboard facing the case. Either way, this SSD is not going to see much airflow being on the back of the board, so expect idle temps around the low 50s. And just know I picked a SATA M.2 SSD because I'm only using this for a data cache drive. I plan on loading the Plex metadata on a separate SSD. However, if I could go back and re-pick some hardware options here, I'd probably replace the Crucial with a Samsung Evo M.2 SSD. Now grab your Silverstone case and remove the 2 rear screws holding down the side panel. After these screws are removed, slide off the side panel and take out the bag of goodies that they included with the case. Then you should see 4 screws holding down the drive cage. Remove those. Keep in mind that these are not the only screws holding this down, so before you try to take the cage out, look at the bottom of the case for 2 additional screws to remove. The drive cage should now come out of the case with ease. Next step is to remove the SSD drive cage. This, again, will have 4 screws to remove and will come out easily. Now we take our baby little 450 watt power supply from Corsair and make sure the fan is facing up and place it in the power supply spot. Secure the power supply with the included 4 screws you found in the power supplies box. They should be in a small little bag with some zip ties and a sticker. At this point, you need to start untying all of the cables inside the case and move them out of the way. Moving forward, you should probably know that I kind of suck at cable management. I mean, I try, but I give up easily, so, you know, good luck. Once you've cleared out the cables, it's time to install your motherboard. Now, you're not going to have to change any standoffs or anything like that. It should fit right into the case with ease. Side note here, you might want to consider plugging in the CPU power cable before screwing your board down. It's kind of a tight fit. So get it lined up correctly and use 4 screws that came with the case to secure it. They should be the slightly bigger all chrome screws. Now I accidentally chose to plug in the CPU power cable after I installed the motherboard, and as you can see, although it was a tight fit, it is still possible to get it in. Either way, get it plugged in and move the other end of the cable off to the side of the case. While we're at it, do the exact same thing with the ATX power cable. If you grab the motherboard's user manual real quick, you can find the front panel header configuration. Use this to connect the front panel wires to the motherboard. Each wire should have their own label, so this should be easy. Although it is really small, but still, you got this. For my first attempt at cable management, I used a cable organizer, stuck it to the inside of the case to try to hold down the front cables as they were routed around the case fans. Route your cables as you see fit. Just make sure that they do not interfere with the spinning fans. Adding to my list of things I probably shouldn't have done, I used a Molex to 3-pin fan adapter to plug in the non-PWM case fans. So 1, I probably should have upgraded these fans to a PWM fans from Noctua. And 2, I didn't really need the splitter anyway because I had 1 case fan port on the motherboard and 2 additional case fan ports on the backplane of the drive cage. So feel free not to get this splitter and use the available ports already in the case. Although sticking the Molex splitter on the bottom of the case did give me a tie down point to help zip tie some of the cables to the bottom and keep them out of the way. Failed cable management attempt number 2? #? Next, plug in your front audio cable. It will be the white one in the corner of the board. After that, and I'm not entirely sure this was necessary, but I stole a small aluminum heatsink off of my old Raspberry Pi and I used it on the M.2 SATA adapter. I figured that the microchip on that adapter could see some sustained usage, so throwing a small heatsink on it just can't hurt anything. If you choose to do this, just align it on the chip and press firmly using the double-sided thermal tape to keep it on. Now you can start plugging in the SATA cables to both the motherboard and the M.2 adapter. Now you will need a total of 8 cables for this. However, I recommend not using the SATA cables that have a 90-degree head on them as they make it difficult to plug things in. I plugged in 4 cables into the board and 4 cables into the adapter. Now to make this all work, I had to dig out an old Molex to SATA power adapter / splitter. Don't worry, in my Amazon links they won't be the, mustard colored that they are here. But go ahead and get that plugged into the second Molex connector on the Molex power cable. And while we're plugging things in, go ahead and put the SATA power cord in too. In this clip, I actually had my main power connected, but I quickly unplugged those to install the GPU, so don't plug those in just yet. To get the GPU in, remove the 3 screws on the back of the case and take out the PCI slot covers. Then slide that P2000 right into the PCI slot. With it in place, you can put the second slot cover back in and reattach the top holder with the 3 screws you removed. Now grab the drive cage. As you may have noticed, there's not much room in the case for all 8 drives in the P2000, so we will have to sacrifice a drive slot to get everything to fit. That's okay, we can just use 1 parity drive for Unraid instead of 2, and we're still going to get a usable 6 drives worth of hard drive storage. To make room for the graphics card, remove the drive caddy from this slot and take the 5 screws out that are holding in the black plastic piece on the side of the drive cage. Now find the black plastic GPU protector in the bag of goodies you got with the case and attach that to the bottom of the cage where it's cut out. Now this piece is important because it will keep the P2000 from touching any kind of metal when you insert in the drive cage. And you can also store the leftover screws back in their original spots, just so you don't lose them. Alright, now let's take a look at the back of the drive cage, specifically at the backplane with all of the SATA ports on them. You'll notice that there are 2 SATA ports per drive slot, but if you look closer, 1 port for each one is a SATA and the other port is a SAS. Now if you plug in any of your SATA cables going to your motherboard into any of the SAS ports, they will not work. So make sure to use the correct SATA ports only. Now with your P2000 installed, route your main power cables the best way you can to get them plugged into the power supply. Now because of how the drive cage sits, I recommend routing them around the back of the P2000. This keeps them out of the way a bit and also helps keep them from getting into the CPU cooler fan. Now the drive cage is a tight fit and it might take a little bit of effort to get the cables out of the way. And you may also notice that the P2000 graphics card is just barely small enough to fit and may slightly be pushed down a bit during the drive cage installation. Don't worry, this is okay. Just try not to put too much force getting the cage in. If the screws don't want to line up or the cage doesn't want to go into the case, take it out and readjust the cables and try again. When you finally get the drive cage in, put the main 4 screws in along with the 2 screws in on the bottom. For the SSD drive cage, make sure that you have the SSD power and SATA ports facing the correct way to get your SSD securely mounted into the cage, and then use the same 4 screws to reattach this SSD cage to the case. Silverstone, the case manufacturer, recommends not using a single power line to power all 4 power ports on the back of the drive's backplane. So take that Molex to 2 SATA port power splitter, plug 1 into the SSD and 1 into the SATA power ports on the back of the backplane. Then take your last Molex connector and plug it in. Afterwards, take your SATA power cord and plug it into the last 2 SATA power ports on the backplane. Now remember when I told you to use the SATA ports and not the SAS ports? Well, here's exclusive footage of me ignoring that and plugging my SATA cables into the wrong ports. Totally did this to visualize the wrong thing to do, and I promptly corrected this by plugging in all the SATA cables into the correct SATA ports. I'm kidding, I messed it up. Anyway, next, here is attempt number 3 at cable management. My goal was to make sure no cables were interfering with either the back case fan or the CPU cooler fan. These must spin freely because the case needs all the cooling it can get. Now take the plastic case key and unlock the front of the case and open it up. Let's just ignore for a second the incorrect installation of the drive slot spacer that I tried, and let's just move forward. Now start taking out all of the empty drive caddies. Mount your hard drives into each drive caddy as shown. Personally, I usually only use the 2 closest screws to the SATA and power ports, but if you want to use all 4, that's totally up to you. After securing your drives in the caddies, slide them back into the drive slots in the case. Now at this point, after you confirm no wires are interfering with any fans, you can replace the case cover you took off initially with the 2 screws in the back that hold it on. You can plug everything in, including your power cable, Ethernet cable, keyboard, mouse, and display cable, but just don't power your server on just yet. Before you try to boot, make sure to grab your new 16 or 32 gigabyte low-profile flash drive. Go to another computer and download the Unraid flash drive installer. This will create a bootable Unraid drive that will run your main operating system. After that's done, once it's plugged in, boot your new server. On first boot, however, you will want to press delete to get into your BIOS and make a few changes. First thing you're going to want to do is enable XMP to get your RAM to run the 3200 MHz advertised speeds that you should be getting. 2. Set your Unraid flash drive as the first bootable device. And 3, go to your boot settings and change the storage boot option to legacy only. If you don't do this, it just will not boot Unraid. Also, I recommend updating your BIOS. You may need another flash drive to do this, or you could just stick the firmware file on your Unraid flash drive, whatever works for you. From here, your new server should boot into Unraid. Hopefully, all should be good, but if not, post in the comments down below. To test this build out, I initially ran Windows. I did a few 10+ minutes of stress test on the CPU to see if I had any headroom for cooling to overclock it. And, well, I really didn't. After 10 minutes of testing, the 3700 got to 83 degrees Celsius, which is a bit high for my taste, but honestly still okay. I feel like if I would have used the Noctua case fans rather than the stock fans, I could have drastically dropped my overall temperatures. I also ran a graphics stress test that found that the P2000 stays at a decent temperature of 64 degrees Celsius. Knowing this is specifically built to be a Plex hardware accelerated beast, I am more than happy with these temperatures. For power usage, I tested the wattage at idle, and this showed me that it used only around 80 watts. However, when I ran a CPU and a graphics test, it would get up to about 230 watts, which means even under full load, it does not have very high power draw. For transcoding capabilities, the P2000 will be able to give you anywhere from 25 to 28 simultaneous 1080p transcodes or 4 to 8 4K transcodes. The 3700 gives it plenty of headroom performance, and with the P2000 carrying most of the weight in Plex, the CPU will be available for other main tasks, like virtual machines or Docker containers or whatever else you want to do. Now, I used the 2.5-inch Samsung SSD as a dedicated Plex SSD, holding all of the Plex metadata like poster arts and movie descriptions. The M.2 SSD is being used as a cache drive, which by the way idles at like 51 but can get up to 61 degrees under load. Again, a little high but still okay. And with me using all 4TB drives in this build video, I have a usable space of 24 TB with a single parity disk. But feel free to put in a larger SSD for your cache drive. In fact, I definitely recommend it if you can afford it, but your Plex SSD should be more than enough space, even with thumbnail generation turned on. So welcome to your new, very powerful, hardware accelerated Unraid / Plex Media Server. Make sure to follow the links in the description below for more information on setting up the software side of things. And if you have any questions or problems, make sure to post them in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching all my videos, like and subscribe, and have yourself a great day.